You are not stuck because you lack effort, and it is not because you are less capable than others. You are stuck because as each day passes, you are living on automatic mode. Without realizing it, you still wake up, still work, still fulfill responsibilities. Yet deep inside there is a very clear feeling that your life is standing still while time does not wait. If you have ever been busy to the point of exhaustion yet felt no real progress, if you have ever understood so much but changed so little, if you have ever promised yourself that you would start living differently only to let everything drift back to the same place, then this story is not meant to give you temporary inspiration. It is meant to point to an honest truth, that life does not slip away because of one major fall. It slips away because of the small choices you repeat every day. And if you are listening this far, it is very likely that the time has come for you to stop waiting and begin truly stepping into your own life. Begins at the moment you realize that you are living but not truly moving forward, not because you lack effort, but because each day passes exactly like the one before it. You wake up, do what needs to be done, fulfill your responsibilities, and then close the day with a quiet sense of exhaustion. There is no major tragedy, no obvious disaster, only a silent truth that life seems to be standing still while time continues to move on. You have not failed in any dramatic sense. You are simply slowly losing the feeling of being in control. And that is precisely what makes this exhaustion so difficult to name. Because on the outside everything still looks fine. The work continues, relationships still function. You are still seen as a responsible person. Yet deep inside, there is a part of you quietly shrinking. The part that once believed you would go further, live more clearly, become stronger. The part that once believed this life held many possibilities yet to be touched. And when you begin to feel that separation, when you look in the mirror and see someone who still exists but no longer feels truly present, that is when this story reaches you, because this moment does not come to those who have given up. It comes to those who have tried for a very long time, who have endured enough, who have been patient with circumstances, with others, with themselves, to the point of forgetting to listen to the signals within. You are not lazy. You are not inadequate. You have simply been living in automatic mode for too long, where each choice is made out of habit rather than awareness, where each day passes without leaving a clear mark in memory. And the danger does not lie in one major wrong decision, but in hundreds of small decisions repeated without your presence in them. You can sense this in very ordinary moments, when the morning begins without an inner sense of ignition, when the evening ends without a feeling of completion, when you find yourself busy yet no closer to anything that truly matters. And it is right here, at this intersection between awareness and familiarity, that this story opens. Not to blame you, nor to push you into temporary emotion, but to point out one clear truth, that life does not slip away because of one hard fall. It slips away because of small, uncontrolled steps. And if you are listening this far, if you recognize yourself in each rhythm of this telling, that is not coincidence. It is a sign that you are ready to face the truth that you do not need more motivation to begin. You need clarity to stop at the right moment. Because every real change begins at the moment you realize you no longer want to live on inertia for even one more day. Go straight into the sweetest trap that many adults fall into every single day. The belief that if they just wait for the right feeling, the right moment, the right motivation, everything will naturally start to flow more smoothly. You are not refusing to act. You are only postponing action with reasons that sound perfectly reasonable. You tell yourself that today you are too tired, that this week is not the right time, that when your mood improves you will begin, that when things become clearer, you will decide. And this way of thinking creates a subtle but extremely dangerous loop, because it makes you believe that standing still is temporary, while in reality it is becoming your default state. Motivation in your mind is slowly elevated into a prerequisite, as if life can only change when emotions give permission. But the truth is that emotion does not arrive to clear the path, It arrives after you have already taken steps forward, and this is the point where many people remain stuck for years without realizing it. They do not fail because they lack intelligence. They fail because they believe in the wrong sequence. They believe that inspiration leads to action, while in reality, small repeated actions are what create lasting inspiration. Every time you wait to feel ready, you are unconsciously reinforcing a message to your brain that the current state is safe, that there is no need to change right now, that tomorrow still has time, and the brain is very skilled at protecting familiarity. It will cooperate perfectly with any delay that looks reasonable on the surface. You will find yourself becoming better and better at explaining why you should not start yet, while inside, you grow more exhausted by the feeling of not moving forward. The irony is that the more you wait for motivation, the less motivation you have, because each day that passes without concrete action weakens your trust in yourself, and when that trust erodes, positive emotions struggle to appear. You begin to live in a vague state of waiting, not fully giving up, but not truly walking either, like standing between two shores without daring to cross. This trap is especially dangerous for responsible people, for those who have tried very hard, because they do not want half measures. They want to do things properly, completely, in a way that feels worthy. Yet that desire for perfection is exactly what keeps them standing still. Because when the standard is too high, the first step becomes heavy, and the brain chooses delay as a way to avoid the potential feeling of failure. You can recognize this through familiar phrases echoing in your mind, that you just need a little more time, that when things are more stable, that when there is less pressure, that when real motivation appears. But if you look back, you will see these phrases have been there for months, even years. Only the context changes, not the outcome. Life remains in the same place. While you move further away from the feeling of control, the important truth that must be faced here is that motivation is not the cause of movement. It is the result of movement. And when you reverse this order, you will always feel lacking energy, lacking determination, lacking belief, because you are waiting for something that only appears after action has already begun. This trap is carefully reinforced by modern society. Everything around you tells you to wait for the right feeling, to follow your emotions, to find motivation first. But no one clearly says that emotions change quickly, while life does not wait. Every day you do not act is a day inertia is strengthened. And inertia does not need your permission to continue. It only needs silence. For this reason, this part is not meant to blame you for waiting. It is meant to place an honest mirror in front of you, so you can see that waiting for motivation is not a neutral strategy. It is a choice, and that choice is shaping your life in very specific ways. If you continue to wait, you will continue to live in preparation. But if you dare to step forward before you feel ready, you will begin to activate an entirely different chain of reactions. And the moment you realize this, the moment you understand that you do not need the right feeling to begin, but need to begin for the feeling to change, that is the first crack in the trap that has held you in place for far too long. Places you face to face with a cold but unavoidable truth, that your life is not shaped by rare grand moments, but by small choices repeated every day in a state that is almost unconscious. You did not become the person you are now because of one important decision. You became this way because of hundreds of very small choices that you allowed to pass without questioning them. From how you start your morning, how you react when you are tired, how you allow yourself to delay, to how you speak to yourself inside your own mind. All of these quietly accumulate and form the trajectory of life you are currently walking. And what makes this truth difficult to accept is that it does not give you anyone to blame. Other people or timing. It places responsibility back where it belongs, on the very small choices you believe did not matter. You can see this clearly. If you look at any ordinary day, there is no single moment in that day that naturally feels decisive. But when you string them together, you realize that the way you lived that day added one brick to your long-term path, One unfocused day does not destroy a life, but a chain of such days will blur your ability to focus. One time breaking a promise to yourself does not make you a failure, but many times like that will weaken your inner trust. And when that trust weakens, every later effort becomes heavier, because you are not only working toward a goal, you are also fighting your own doubt. The danger is that this process happens very slowly, so slowly that you do not notice the change, until you look back and see that you have moved very far from the place you once believed you would reach. Life does not change abruptly. It drifts little by little, like water wearing down stone. It does not need force, only repetition over time. And because of this, many adults live with a bitter sense of surprise when they realize they are standing in a position they never consciously chose. They do not remember deciding to live this way, yet they are living in the outcome of small choices they were not aware of. This truth can make you uncomfortable, because it removes the comforting idea that one breakthrough is enough. It says there is no sustainable shortcut, no magical moment that suddenly appears to correct years of living on inertia, but at the same time, it offers a very practical form of hope, because if life is built from small choices, it can also be changed by small choices. You do not need to overturn your entire life. You only need to intervene at the daily repetition points where the trajectory is either reinforced or redirected. Each small choice is like a vote you cast into the ballot box of destiny. One vote does not decide the outcome, but hundreds of votes in the same direction create an irreversible result. And the question is, what you are voting for each day. Are you voting for awareness or for ease, for presence or for avoidance, for action, even if small, or for waiting a little longer? Many people underestimate the power of small choices because they do not see immediate results. But the brain does not wait for big results to learn. It learns from repetition. It records what you do frequently as important, and what you avoid as something to continue avoiding. Over time, the brain automates these choices, turning them into habits, then into reflexes. And at that point, you no longer feel like you are choosing. You are simply reacting, living according to a script written by very ordinary days in the past. This truth is not meant to make you feel guilty. It is meant to return forgotten power to you. The power that lives in the small moments you usually overlook, because that is where the future is being written line by line. Every time you choose to keep a promise to yourself, no matter how small, you send a new signal to your brain that you are someone who can be trusted. Every time you choose to act without waiting for a perfect feeling, you break an old loop and a new loop begins to form. What must be clearly understood is that you do not need massive motivation to change direction. You need consistency held long enough to create momentum. And momentum does not come from explosive moments. It comes from the patient repetition of actions no one sees. When you understand this, you begin to see life differently. You no longer wait for special days to begin. You start paying attention to how you live on very ordinary days, because you know those days are quietly deciding where you will stand in a few years. And when this truth truly sinks in, not as theory but as awareness, you realize that you were never lacking opportunities to change. You were only lacking attention to the small choices you are making every single day. Goes straight into the paradox that leaves many adults confused and exhausted. The busier they become, the more stuck they feel. You do more than before, carry more responsibility than before, follow a denser schedule than before, yet the feeling of moving forward does not increase at the same pace. Sometimes it even decreases, and this creates a very particular kind of fatigue. Fatigue from effort that does not feel rewarded, fatigue from ending each day without the sense of getting closer to anything that truly matters. You can recognize this in how you are always busy but rarely satisfied, always have something to do but rarely see clearly what you are actually building. And right here, an important truth must be faced directly, that busyness is not the same as progress, and effort without clear direction easily turns into motion in place. Like running on a treadmill, sweat pours out, but your position does not change. What allows this state to persist is that busyness feels useful. It creates the illusion that you are doing the right thing, that you deserve to be tired, that you have tried hard enough. But if you stop and look deeper, you will see that most of this busyness is reactive, reacting to external demands, reacting to pressure, reacting to other people's expectations, and very little of it is conscious choice, aimed at a long-term axis you truly want to build. You do not lack discipline, you lack clarity. You do not lack energy, you are dispersing it across too many directions that create no momentum. And when energy is divided, no single direction is strong enough to produce change you can feel. Over time, the brain begins to associate effort with frustration, and this is extremely dangerous because when effort is not rewarded with a sense of progress, intrinsic motivation weakens. You start working not because you believe it leads somewhere, but simply to avoid the guilt of doing nothing. And at that point, busyness becomes a shell that hides an inner emptiness. You can see yourself in very ordinary moments. When the schedule is full but the mind feels scattered. When you finish one task only to rush immediately into the next without a moment to register it. When the day passes quickly but the memory of it is vague. This is a sign of living in reactive mode, where you are no longer directing the rhythm, but merely trying to keep up with what keeps coming at you. And the irony is that modern society often praises this state, praises busyness, praises always having something to do, but rarely asks whether those things are bringing you closer to the person you want to become. And because of this, many adults end up both tired and disoriented, because they cannot say they are lazy, yet they also cannot say they are moving in the right direction. And this ambiguity quietly erodes the spirit. Each day that passes without a sense of progress creates a growing gap between effort and meaning, and when that gap becomes large enough, people begin to doubt themselves, doubt their ability to change, doubt the value of trying, even doubt the dreams that once made them feel alive. What must be clearly understood here is that not all movement creates progress. Progress only appears when movement is connected to a clear value axis and repeated long enough in the same direction. Without that axis, you can do a great deal and still feel like you are standing still, like rowing a boat without knowing the direction. The harder you row, the more tired you become. But the shore does not come any closer. And what makes this state hard to escape is that busyness gives you no time to stop and ask questions. It fills your days with things to do, leaving no space to think about what should be done. You become accustomed to reacting quickly, solving what is in front of you, extinguishing short-term problems, but you lack time for long-term questions, and it is precisely those questions that shape trajectory. When you do not question direction, the brain continues to choose what is familiar and easy, and so the loop continues. Busyness leads to fatigue. Fatigue leads to lower quality choices. Lower quality choices lead to vague results, and vague results push you to become even busier to compensate. What needs to be emphasized here is that escaping this stuck state does not come from doing more. It comes from seeing more clearly, clear about what truly matters, clear about the long-term axis you are building, clear about the small actions that carry cumulative impact. When that clarity is present, the workload may decrease, while the feeling of moving forward increases, because each action has its place within a larger picture. And when the brain begins to recognize that effort is connected to meaning, inner energy gradually returns, not as temporary excitement, but as steadiness. You no longer need busyness to feel valuable. You begin to need progress to feel that you are living rightly. And it is precisely this shift, from busyness to direction, from reaction to choice, that becomes the turning point for escaping prolonged stagnation, because from here life is no longer just a list of tasks to complete. It begins to become a process of intentional construction, where each day, no matter how small, contributes to a direction you can feel with your own body and mind. Names the invisible enemy that has quietly stolen the future of many people without making any noise, the state of subtle daily slipping. Not a major fall that forces you to stop, but a deviation so small that it does not feel dangerous. You are still living, still working, still fulfilling responsibilities, yet little by little you allow yourself to become more lenient with small choices. Lenient about skipping something you promised yourself, lenient about delaying one more day, lenient about accepting low energy as normal. And this leniency creates a downward trajectory that moves very slowly, so slowly that you grow accustomed to it before you realize what is happening. This enemy is dangerous because it does not appear as something clearly negative. It appears as a reasonable voice in your head, saying that you are tired today, so resting a little is fine. That skipping once does not change anything, that life is already hard enough, so there is no need to be strict with yourself. And each of these whispers sounds kind on the surface, but when repeated long enough, they build a way of living where you always choose the path of least resistance. And the path of least resistance is rarely the path that leads to growth. The danger is that slipping does not hurt right away. It only creates a gradual numbness. You do not feel like you are losing something specific. You only feel yourself drifting farther from the stronger version that once existed in imagination. You can recognize this when standards that once mattered begin to lower. Things that were once unacceptable become normal. Boundaries that were once held firmly are loosened for convenience. And the brain adapts very quickly to this new standard. It records that a lower level is acceptable, and from there it no longer pushes you back to the old level. You begin to live in a false safety zone where there is no great pressure but also no real growth. This invisible enemy does not take from you loudly. It takes away bit by bit your capacity to endure, your ability to focus, your ability to keep promises to yourself. And when these capacities weaken, every larger goal becomes far more distant. Because you are not only facing external challenges, you are also facing internal erosion. One of the most frightening aspects of subtle slipping is that it changes how you see yourself. Each time you ignore a better choice, no matter how small, a part of you registers that promises to yourself are not very important. And when this repeats, your identity begins to shift. You no longer see yourself as someone fully reliable. You begin to doubt your ability to sustain effort. And this doubt makes every new beginning heavier, because you are not only facing the task, you are facing the memory of previous abandonments. Subtle slipping is therefore not just a behavioral issue, it is an identity issue. It changes the story you tell yourself about who you are. And when that story weakens, any external encouragement struggles to last, because deep inside you no longer believe you are someone who can hold a choice long enough to see results. What is worth noting is that subtle slipping is often triggered in very ordinary moments. When you are tired, when you are distracted, when you feel unseen, when the reward for doing the right thing does not arrive immediately, and because of this, it cannot be solved by big promises or dramatic decisions. It can only be stopped by awareness in very small moments, where you realize that this choice, however small, is still voting for the person you are becoming. You do not need to be perfect to resist subtle slipping. You need consistency enough to not allow it to become the new norm. Each time you choose to do the right thing, even when no one knows, even when it does not feel good right away, you create a small resistance against downward inertia. And that resistance, if repeated long enough, creates a different direction. What matters is understanding that subtle slipping is not a sign of weakness. It is a natural response of the brain to fatigue and familiarity. But whether you let it guide your life or not is still a choice. And that choice happens not in big moments, but in very ordinary decisions you often overlook. When you truly understand this mechanism, you will stop looking for emotional breakthroughs to change your life. You will begin paying attention to maintaining small standards every day, because you know those standards are the barrier between a life that is slowly drifting away and a life that is being built with intention. And the moment you face this invisible enemy directly, The moment you stop calling it by gentle names and begin recognizing its real cost, that is the moment you reclaim your power of choice from where you unknowingly gave it away. Brings you into contact with a quiet law that governs every result you are living with, whether you realize it or not. The silent law of cause and effect, operating at a very small level, where every action, even the discrete ones, leaves a trace, and every choice, even when no one sees it, is shaping your future in very concrete ways. Many people think of cause and effect as something grand and distant, but the truth is that it is unfolding right now in your daily habits, in how you start your morning, in how you respond under pressure, in how you handle fatigue and distraction. Every time you choose what is easier instead of what is right, you are planting a seed, and every time you hold a standard, no matter how small, you are planting another seed. The issue is not which seed produces results immediately, but which seed is planted often enough to become a harvest. Your life at this moment is the harvest of choices that have been repeated over a long enough period of time, and what makes this law hard to see is its delay. Cause and effect does not respond instantly. It responds through accumulation, which makes people confuse cause with outcome. You may skip a good habit today without seeing any clear consequence, but if you repeat that many times, the consequence will appear at a moment when you no longer remember where it began. Similarly, you may hold a small discipline for many days without seeing meaningful change, but at some point, the result will appear as if from nowhere. And this is why many people misjudge their own effort. They quit too early because they see no feedback, or they continue living leniently because they have not yet seen the cost. The silent law of cause and effect does not need your belief to operate. It continues whether you are aware of it or not, and when you begin to view life through this lens, you understand that no day is neutral. Every day tilts in a direction, either reinforcing the person you are becoming or eroding what you are trying to preserve. This is especially important for adults because at this stage change rarely comes from dramatic shocks. It comes from accumulation, and accumulation can move in either direction, upward or downward. Many people live with the feeling that they have not done anything seriously wrong, but they also have not done enough right to build momentum. And it is precisely in this gray zone that the silent law of cause and effect exerts its greatest power, because it does not warn, it does not hurt immediately. It simply continues to record and compound. Each time you neglect focus, your ability to focus weakens slightly. Each time you delay an important action, delay becomes easier. Each time you lower your standards with yourself, that standard becomes the new baseline. And over time, these small changes combine into a very large distance between where you are standing and where you once thought you would arrive. What must be made clear is that this law of cause and effect is not punitive. It is completely neutral. It does not care about your intentions. It only responds to repeated action. You can have very good intentions, but if your daily actions do not align, the outcome will still reflect the actions rather than the wishes. And conversely, you can begin with very small, very modest actions. But if they are repeated with awareness, the results will emerge in a very solid way. When you truly understand this, you stop searching for sudden transformations and begin to respect the power of process. You no longer dismiss small choices, because you know they are the basic units that shape destiny. Each small choice is like a line of code sent into the operating system of your life, and that system will run according to the commands repeated most often. If you frequently send signals of delay, the system optimizes for delay. If you frequently send signals of focus, the system optimizes for focus. This explains why, under the same circumstances, some people become steadier while others become more scattered. The difference does not lie in the events. It lies in the repeated responses to those events, and repeated responses are where cause and effect is activated. When you begin to observe your life from this perspective, you start to see connections you previously overlooked. You see why some negative outcomes are not bad luck, but the result of familiar choices, and why some lasting progress is not luck, but the reward of quiet persistence. Understanding the silent law of cause and effect does not increase pressure. On the contrary, it frees you from the illusion that you must do something extraordinary to change your life. It returns power to where it belongs. In the very ordinary choices you can control, even on days when your energy is low, you can still plant the right seeds. And when you do that long enough, you begin to live in a reality that responds to your awareness, not loudly, not dramatically, but genuinely, steadily. And from this foundation, the next parts of the story begin to open, where you not only understand the law, but start learning how to use it to build a new life trajectory, one that aligns more closely with the person you want to become. Opens from a very ordinary moment. No dramatic music, no special event, just a familiar morning where you wake up, light slips through a crack in the door, the body still feels heavy, the mind still feels foggy. And right in that moment, before anyone demands anything, before any external pressure appears, destiny begins to be written once again, not through big decisions, but through how you treat this small moment. You can choose to slide along inertia, reach for your phone, let your mind be pulled away before you are even present. Or you can choose to pause for a few breaths. Feel your body, place yourself back into the day. The difference between these two choices does not produce an obvious result immediately, but when repeated, it creates two completely different trajectories. In one scenario, you begin the day in a state of being led, reacting, rushing, and the entire day carries the same rhythm. In the other scenario, you begin the day with a moment of agency, and however small it is, it sends a powerful signal that you are present in your own life. Moments like this appear constantly throughout the day, when you face a difficult task and feel the urge to delay, when you are tired and must choose between giving up or holding a small standard, when you are distracted and must decide whether to return to what matters. Each of these moments is like a very narrow intersection, not large enough to feel dramatic, but enough to shift direction if repeated often enough. And what is notable is that no one witnesses these choices except you. There is no recognition, no praise, no immediate reward, only the quiet truth that you are voting for the person you are becoming. Many people believe destiny is decided by major turning points, but in reality those turning points are only the result of hundreds of small choices accumulated beforehand. When you look back at a life that has changed, you rarely find a single day where everything turned around. You only see a sequence of days where someone began choosing differently in moments no one noticed. And that is why paying attention to these ordinary scenes becomes extremely important, because this is where you have direct influence. You do not need more conditions. You do not need more time. You only need the awareness to recognize that this moment carries weight too. An evening after a long day is another example. You sit down, energy is low, the mind wants relief, and you stand before very familiar choices, choosing to consume something that helps you forget, or choosing to do something that helps you move forward even slightly. Neither choice changes your life immediately, but when repeated, they create two very different versions of you in a few years. One version accustomed to avoiding fatigue through distraction, and another that learns to handle fatigue through presence. The power of these ordinary scenes comes from the fact that they happen continuously. Every day brings you dozens of small opportunities to reinforce or weaken trajectory, and your brain learns from what you do frequently, not from what you promise yourself. If you often choose to return to what matters after being distracted, your brain records that you are someone capable of self-regulation. If you often choose to give up when tired, your brain records that fatigue is a reason to stop. Over time, these recordings become reflexes, and then you no longer feel like you are choosing. You are simply living according to a script, written by very ordinary scenes in the past. What matters is understanding that you do not need to control every moment of the day to change destiny. You only need to identify a few key moments and hold your standard there, It might be the moment you begin the morning, the moment you face the hardest task, the moment you end the day. If you choose presence at these points long enough, trajectory will begin to change in a way you can feel, not through excitement, but through a growing sense of self-respect, the sense that you are doing the right thing, even when no one sees it. And that feeling is the foundation of sustainability. Many people search for motivation in big stories, but real power lies in seeing meaning in very small scenes. Because when you understand that destiny is created here, right in this moment, you stop waiting for perfect conditions to live differently. You begin living differently within the conditions you already have. And that is when life begins to shift, quietly, without drama, but real, solid, because it is built from choices you can repeat every day without needing anyone's permission. Marks the moment when small actions begin to shift from something you do into something you are. Because when a choice is repeated long enough, it is no longer just behavior. It becomes identity. Many people try to change their lives by forcing themselves to do more, harder, faster. But they overlook a far more subtle mechanism, the way the brain builds the story of who you are based on what you do consistently. Each time you complete a small action, even when no one is watching, the brain records a very important data point, that you are someone who keeps promises to yourself. This data point carries more weight than any verbal self-affirmation because it is built from real experience rather than desire. Over time, these small data points connect into an implicit belief, and that implicit belief begins to shape how you act in the future. You no longer need to persuade yourself so much to begin, because deep down you already have evidence that you are someone who can begin. This is the core difference between scattered effort and identity level change. Scattered effort requires willpower every time you act, while identity change allows action to happen with less friction, because it aligns with the story you believe about yourself. A small action only becomes a true hinge when it is attached to identity, not through words, but through felt recognition. When you do the right thing even in a very small way and notice that you just behaved like the person you respect, a crucial inner circuit is activated. Self-respect. Self-respect does not come from external recognition. It comes from alignment between what you know is right and what you actually do. Each time these two align, even briefly, you are strengthening a psychological foundation more solid than any praise. And that foundation is what allows you to continue when emotions do not support you. Many people underestimate the impact of keeping small promises to themselves. They believe only big changes matter, but the brain does not operate on that logic. It operates on repetition. A small action repeated often enough sends a stronger signal than a large action performed rarely. If you only act powerfully once in a while, the brain treats it as an exception. But if you act in small, consistent ways, the brain treats it as the norm, and the new norm is what changes trajectory. This explains why many people can surge briefly but fail to sustain it. They act from emotional highs rather than from an identity built gradually. When emotion fades, action disappears. In contrast, when action is anchored to identity, emotion becomes something that follows, not a prerequisite. You begin to act, not because you feel motivated, but because that is how you operate, just as you brush your teeth every day, not because you feel inspired, but because it fits who you are. This shift does not happen in a single day. It is the result of choosing correctly in very ordinary moments, when no one is watching, when there is no immediate reward, when skipping would not cause obvious consequences. It is precisely in these moments that identity is trained. Each time you choose the slightly harder option, you teach the brain that difficulty does not equal avoidance. Each time you return to what matters after being distracted, you teach the brain that you are capable of self-regulation. These lessons are stored very deeply, and over time they change how you see yourself. You begin to view yourself as more disciplined, not because you try to apply the label, but because you have living evidence of it. And when identity shifts, many internal struggles begin to lose intensity. You no longer have to negotiate with yourself as much. Because actions aligned with the new identity feel more natural. What matters is understanding that you do not need to change your entire identity to start seeing results. You only need a small anchor, an action small enough that you can hold it even on difficult days, and when that anchor is held long enough, it pulls other actions with it, like the first link in a chain reaction. When you begin to see small actions as a way of shaping who you are, you stop dismissing them. You understand that each time you choose correctly, you are not just completing a task, you are laying a brick in the foundation of a new identity, and that foundation is what will support you in periods when emotion is no longer strong enough to lead. From here, the story is no longer only about what to do, it begins to be about who to become. And this shift opens the door to the next parts, where action is no longer a burden you force, but a natural way of living in alignment with the person you are building day by day. Clarifies the thin but decisive boundary between understanding and movement in real life. Because many adults do not lack knowledge, they lack translation into motion. You can clearly understand what is right, what is necessary, what would make life better, but if that understanding is not converted into repeated action, it creates no living value. It only creates the illusion of progress. And this illusion is more dangerous than ignorance, because it makes you feel as if you are moving in the right direction while in reality you are standing still. Each time you hear something reasonable and do not act on it, a very small gap forms between what you know and what you do. If this gap persists, it weakens inner trust, because you are not only missing external results, you are eroding internal coherence. And that coherence is the foundation of mental strength. Many people confuse feeling inspired with real change. They feel lit up for a moment, feel awakened, feel the desire to live differently, but when emotion settles, action does not follow, and the next time they hear similar messages, the impact is weaker, not because the content has lost quality, but because the brain has learned that these signals do not lead to action, so it stops treating them as important. This is how people gradually become immune to messages that once moved them. Not because they are numb, but because they are used to not acting after understanding. And the brain always prioritizes what leads to real movement. Understanding that is not used is filed into a low-value category. Over time, you can become someone who understands a great deal but does very little, and this state creates a specific kind of fatigue. Fatigue from knowing you are capable of more but not living up to that capacity. Fatigue from each new insight, making the distance between current reality and potential even clearer. And if that distance is not closed through action, it becomes the source of self-blame and self-doubt. What must be recognized is that understanding is not the first step of change. It is only a necessary condition. Change begins when understanding is attached to a concrete action, small enough to be done immediately, clear enough that you do not have to negotiate with yourself, repeatable enough to create momentum. If every insight you gain is paired with a small action, the brain learns a new rule that understanding leads to movement. And this rule is powerful because it restores inner trust. You begin to trust that when you understand something important, you will act on it. And this trust removes much of the psychological friction around starting. Many people search for motivation to act, but what they truly need is reliability within themselves. Trust that they will do what they know is right even without high emotion. And that reliability is built only through repeated experience where understanding and action align. Another important point to clarify is that action does not need to be large to have value. Action only needs to be real, specific, and repeatable. Many people dismiss small steps because they do not feel worthy of their understanding. They believe that if they understand deeply, they must act in a way that matches that depth. And this belief keeps them frozen, because large actions require more energy, more conditions, and invite more delay. While small actions are overlooked, yet it is precisely small actions that form the most effective bridge between understanding and change, because they allow you to begin immediately within current conditions. When this bridge is used often enough, the gap between knowing and doing gradually shrinks, And as that gap narrows, a sense of inner wholeness increases. You no longer feel as if you are living two lives, one in thought and one in action. You begin to experience alignment. And this alignment brings a different kind of energy, not explosive but durable, not loud but steady. Many people think their problem is a lack of discipline, but in reality, the issue often lies in allowing the gap between knowing and doing to persist for too long. And when that gap grows, every effort feels heavier, because each action is not just an action, it is also a dialogue with the past, where you repeatedly did not do what you knew. Closing this gap does not require becoming someone else overnight. It requires resetting the relationship between understanding and action, starting with refusing to let understanding end without a concrete step, however small. When you begin living by this principle, you will notice a subtle but profound shift. You no longer consume knowledge to feel better, you consume knowledge to live better. And when every insight is converted into movement, life begins to respond differently, not with instant miracles, but with a tangible sense of progress. Little by little, enough for you to know that you are no longer just understanding life. You are actively participating in building it. Shifts the story from scattered effort to building a life system that can be sustained long-term. Because by this point, you can clearly see that the problem is not whether you try or not, but whether that effort is placed within a structure strong enough to function without depending on emotion. Many people act in bursts. When energy is high, they do a lot. When they feel tired, they stop completely. And this way of living creates constant ups and downs that make life unstable. What must be faced directly is that human beings cannot live on pure willpower for long periods. Willpower is a finite resource. It drains each day as you are forced to make too many decisions, and if every important action requires high willpower, exhaustion is inevitable. A life system exists precisely to solve this problem. It allows you to do the right thing with less negotiation, less mental cost, because action has already been placed inside a fixed frame, happening almost automatically. Just as you do not need motivation to brush your teeth each morning, you do it because that is how the day begins. An effective life system does not need to be complex. It only needs to be clear and repeatable, clear about when you do what, where, for how long, and repeated long enough for the brain to treat it as the norm. When action is tied to a fixed context, the brain no longer needs to decide again from scratch each day. It shifts into execution mode, and this shift significantly reduces psychological friction. Many people fail not because they do not know what to do, but because each day they must decide everything again. Decide whether to act or not, decide when to act, decide how long to act, and each decision drains energy. By the time they truly begin, their mind is already tired and action feels heavy. A life system removes most of these decisions by answering them in advance. You no longer ask whether you will act. You only ask how to act within the defined frame. One critical point to emphasize is that a system is not built to produce fast results. It is built to survive the days when you do not feel like doing anything at all. If a system only works when you feel motivated, it is not a system. It is just a beautiful plan on paper. A good system must be small enough to maintain even when energy is low, flexible enough not to collapse when an imperfect day happens, and clear enough that you do not have to think too much before starting. Many people set standards too high for their systems. They want every day to be perfect, complete, ideal, and when that does not happen, they abandon the entire system. But in reality, sustainable systems are built on minimum standards. Standards you can still meet on difficult days, because difficult days are where systems are tested. If you only act when everything is favorable, you do not need a system. You only need emotion. An effective life system must also include recovery, because humans are not machines. You will have days of fatigue, distraction, days when you do not meet your expectations. The system should not punish you for this. It should allow you to return as quickly as possible without carrying a sense of failure. This is why rhythm matters more than intensity. A day of doing little without stopping entirely is better than a day of doing a lot followed by disappearing for many days. When you keep rhythm, the brain learns that action is continuous, not a rare event, and once the brain learns this, returning becomes much easier. A life system also needs to be anchored to fixed points in the day, moments you are certain to pass through, such as the morning after waking up or the evening before ending the day. When action is attached to these anchors, you do not need to remember more, you simply follow a familiar sequence. Many people try to add new actions to an already overloaded life, then quit because they cannot find space. But if you replace or attach a new action to an existing anchor, sustainability increases dramatically. Equally important is that the system must serve the identity you are building, not fight against it. If a system makes you feel as though you are forcing yourself to become someone unfamiliar, resistance will appear quickly. But if the system reinforces the story that you are someone who honors commitments, someone who prioritizes what matters, someone who acts with intention, maintaining it will feel like preserving self-respect rather than carrying a burden. From here, effort no longer feels like working against yourself. It becomes the way you care for your identity each day. And when action is placed within a fitting system, results begin to appear differently, not as sudden leaps, but as stability. The feeling that you are moving forward even in weeks where nothing special happens. The feeling that your life is no longer entirely dependent on mood. And this feeling creates a deep form of freedom. Freedom from waiting for inspiration. Freedom from having to start over too many times. Freedom to continue, even when things are imperfect. When you begin living within such a system, you realize that strength does not lie in how much you can do on a good day, but in how you continue on ordinary days. And from this foundation, the next parts of the story open, where systems not only help you act, but shape environment, momentum, and ultimately, the person you become in a sustainable and repeatable way. Expands the story beyond the personal sphere to look directly at a powerful force that is often underestimated. Environment, and what you allow to exist around you every day, because at a certain point it is no longer willpower or determination that decides direction, but what is constantly within your reach. Many people try to change their lives by changing their thinking while keeping the same old environment. And they quickly exhaust themselves by fighting invisible pulls all day long. Environment is not only physical space. It is the sounds you hear, the images you see, the conversations you take part in, the content you consume, and the standards that are treated as normal around you. All of these elements are continuously sending signals to the brain about what matters and what can be ignored. If your environment constantly encourages distraction, leniency, fast consumption, instant reaction, then no matter how good your system is, you will have to spend a great deal of energy to maintain it. On the other hand, if the environment is designed to support the right choices, you will find action becoming lighter in a natural way, not because you are stronger, but because resistance has been reduced. Many people do not realize that they are being pulled each day by things they never consciously chose. A phone that is always present with constant notifications, a cluttered workspace, relationships that revolve around complaint and delay, forms of entertainment that drain energy but are treated as rewards. All of these create a quiet current, and if you are not aware, you will drift with that current even after setting different goals. What is important to understand is that you do not need a perfect environment to move forward. You only need to reduce the forces that pull in the opposite direction of what you want to build. Every distracting element that is removed or placed slightly farther away helps you save mental energy for what matters. And that saved energy compounds over time. Many people try to add more discipline to their lives while keeping every obstacle right in front of them, and then blame themselves when they cannot sustain it. But in reality, this is an uneven battle. Environment always defeats willpower if repeated long enough. For this reason, changing environment is not avoiding responsibility. It is a smart way to support responsibility. A very small environmental change can create a large impact if it happens every day. Placing important work tools in easier reach, creating spaces free from intrusive distraction, choosing more exposure to people with higher standards. All of these send new signals to the brain about the way of life that is prioritized. Over time, you will find yourself needing to force less to do the right thing because the environment has already done part of that work for you. Another key element of environment is your closest relationships. Human beings naturally adjust behavior to match the norms of the group they belong to. If the people around you treat procrastination as normal, complaining as familiar, giving up as understandable, you will need immense strength not to be pulled along. And that strength cannot be sustained indefinitely. If you are near people who value presence, consistency, progress, even when small, those standards will gradually become normal to you. Not because you are forced, but because the brain learns through observation and always seeks alignment to conserve energy. This does not mean you must cut off all old relationships. It means you must be aware of their level of influence. You need to know what you are absorbing through repeated conversations, through familiar stories, through justifications shared as empathy. When you begin filtering environment in this way, you will notice a subtle change. You no longer have to remind yourself constantly to return to what matters, because the environment is already reminding you. One important point to emphasize is that environment does not only affect action, it directly shapes identity. You gradually become the version that fits the environment you live in. If your environment values attention, focus will feel more natural. If your environment values speed and surface, depth will be harder to maintain. And because identity is formed through repetition, environment is the silent scriptwriter of who you become. When you understand this, you no longer treat environment design as a secondary matter. You see it as a core part of your life system. Because at a certain point, environment will decide whether you continue forward or return to old inertia. If environment supports the new direction, you will continue even when tired. If environment resists, you will have to rely on willpower to swim upstream every day. And very few people can do that for long. For this reason, this part does not call on you to change everything around you at once. It calls on you to begin seeing environment as leverage. Each small environmental change is a vote for the future. And when enough of those votes are cast in the same direction, you will see life begin to respond differently. Not because you have become extraordinary, but because you have stopped living inside an environment that constantly pulls you away from the person you want to become. And from this foundation, the next part will take you into a very different experience, where momentum appears not as a sudden leap, but as a natural movement when all elements begin pointing in the same direction. Marks the moment when momentum begins to appear, not loudly, not explosively, but clearly enough for you to feel that life is no longer pushing against you the way it used to. This is a phase many people have touched without being able to name. They simply feel that things begin to flow more smoothly. Returning to what matters no longer feels as heavy as before. Days that fall out of rhythm no longer trigger a sense of collapse. And most importantly, you no longer have to start again from zero so many times. Momentum is not heightened motivation. It is the state in which the next action requires less energy than the previous one. Because the system has been set, the environment has been arranged, and identity has begun to shift. When momentum appears, the brain stops seeing the right action as a threat. It begins to see it as familiar, and this familiarity significantly reduces psychological friction. You no longer have to convince yourself so much. You simply return to the rhythm that already exists. Many people fail to realize that momentum is an asset, and like any asset, it must be protected, because momentum is not lost because of one bad day. It is lost when bad days are allowed to stretch on without a clear return point. What matters at this stage is understanding that you do not need to keep accelerating to preserve momentum. You need to keep rhythm. Keeping rhythm means that whether the day is good or difficult, you maintain a minimum level of action sufficient for the brain to remember the direction, Many people break their own momentum because they confuse progress with perfection. They believe that if they cannot do it well enough, it is better not to do it at all. And this thinking pulls them back into interruption, while momentum only requires continuity, not excellence. A small action on a hard day carries more value than a large action on an easy day, because it keeps the chain unbroken. And that chain is what creates the long-term sense of moving forward. When momentum is held, you begin to experience a very different kind of freedom. Freedom from having to force yourself back each time you slip, because you already have a familiar path. You know how you will return, where you will return, and with what action. This clarity significantly reduces baseline anxiety. Because you are no longer afraid of temporary misalignment, you trust your ability to return, and that trust is powerful. It allows you to accept imperfect days without losing direction. A clear sign of momentum is when you begin to feel the difference between fatigue and exhaustion. You may be tired after a long day, but you no longer feel empty, because you know you acted in alignment with a long-term direction. This feeling is subtle, but it creates deep inner reassurance, and that reassurance allows you to continue without having to push yourself with harsh inner pressure. Momentum also changes how you view small failures. Before, a missed day could make you question the entire effort, but once momentum exists, a missed day is seen as a temporary deviation, not a collapse. You no longer assign excessive negative meaning to small slips, because you have evidence that you can sustain over time, and that evidence changes your response. Instead of self-blame, you adjust. Instead of quitting, you return. This is the psychological maturity many people seek but never reach because they have never remained in a state of momentum long enough. Another important realization is that momentum does not stay confined to one area. When you learn how to build momentum in one place, this way of thinking spreads to others. You begin to believe that change is a process that can be managed, not a miracle. And this belief reduces the fear of starting in new areas, because you know you do not need to get everything right immediately. You only need to create a chain long enough. When you live with momentum, life begins to respond differently, not because circumstances suddenly change, but because the way you interact with circumstances has changed. You no longer react impulsively. You have your own rhythm, and that rhythm helps you remain clear, even as pressure increases. This is why people with momentum often appear calmer, not because they have less to do, but because they are no longer fighting themselves as much. And when inner conflict decreases, energy is released for what truly matters. This part should be understood as a pivotal transition, where you no longer live through scattered effort, but through continuous movement, slow enough to be sustainable, solid enough to resist disruption. And from this foundation, the story moves deeper into inner transformation, where repeated action not only produces external results, but begins to shape a deep belief about self-worth and your place within your own life. Takes you deeper into a subtle yet decisive transformation, where repeated action begins to create lasting belief and genuine self-respect. Not something borrowed from praise or external validation, but something built from lived daily experience. When you hold small choices steady long enough, something very important happens inside. You begin to trust yourself in a different way. Not a vague belief that you have potential, but a belief grounded in evidence that you are someone who does what you know is right. And belief built on evidence is always stronger than belief built on desire. Each time you return to your system on a hard day, each time you keep rhythm when no one is watching, a small piece is added to your inner story. The story that you are reliable, that you do not abandon yourself when emotion does not support you. Over time, this story becomes the foundation of self-respect, and self-respect is very different from surface confidence. Confidence can rise and fall with circumstances, with short-term success or failure. But self-respect is anchored in inner consistency. It does not need constant proof. It exists as a stable sense that you are living in alignment with your values. Many people seek confidence by achieving more, doing better, showing more. yet still feel fragile, because the inner foundation is not solid. When failure appears, their entire self-image shakes. In contrast, when self-respect is built from repeated action, you can face difficulty without collapsing, because you do not judge your worth solely through immediate results. You judge it through how you respond and return. This creates a profound inner freedom. You are no longer obsessed with looking right. You focus on doing right. And this shift changes many daily decisions. You begin choosing actions that align with the person you respect, even when they do not bring quick rewards, because the deepest reward already lives in inner wholeness. Another important change at this stage is the way you speak to yourself begins to shift. Before, each misalignment could trigger self-blame, doubt, and questions that weaken the spirit. But when self-respect has a foundation, you face deviation with adjustment rather than self-attack. You no longer need to prove that you are not inadequate, because you already have enough evidence that you can return. This gentleness does not make you weaker. It makes you more resilient, because energy is not wasted on inner conflict. It is preserved for the next action. Many people fear that without harsh self-pressure, they will become lazy. But in reality, when self-respect is built correctly, you naturally protect the standards that created it. You do not want to lose the sense of respect for yourself that has just formed. And this desire to protect becomes a natural source of drive. No shouting, no forcing. It operates quietly, yet powerfully. At this stage, you also begin to see failure and difficulty in a different light. They are no longer proof that you are not good enough. They become data to refine the system. You ask a different question. No longer why am I like this, but what in the system needs to change, so next time is better. This question keeps you in a position of agency, and that position is the core of feeling in control of your life. When you live long enough in this state, you realize that the deepest trust does not come from everything going smoothly. It comes from knowing how you will act when things do not go smoothly. You trust that you will return. You trust that you will not abandon your values, and that trust changes how you step into each day. You no longer enter the day with fragile hope that it will be good. You enter with certainty that whatever the day brings, you will live according to the way you have chosen. And this certainty creates a calm, deep strength, not loud, but difficult to shake. From here, the story begins to move into another layer, where you not only maintain a system for yourself, but begin to see the person you are becoming, and that person starts to shape how you show up in the world, in your work, in your relationships, and in the way you step into your own life each day. Poses the pivotal question that by now you have enough lived experience to answer for yourself. Who are you becoming when you hold this choice long enough? Not in imagination, but in real life, because a person is not defined by rare peak moments, but by how they show up consistently each day. When the system is running, the environment is supportive, momentum has formed, and self-respect has a foundation. A very clear change begins to appear. You no longer live in a state of constant self-justification. You begin to live in a state of grounded presence. You enter your work with deeper focus, not because pressure has increased, but because distraction has decreased. You enter relationships with greater clarity, not because others have changed, but because you are no longer reacting from old inertia. You step into difficult decisions with less inner chaos, because you are accustomed to choosing based on values rather than fleeting emotion. Many people believe that self-change means becoming someone entirely different, but in reality, sustainable change often feels like returning. You feel that you are finally living in alignment with what you always knew mattered, but were not yet strong enough to hold. The greatest difference at this stage is not in what you do more of, but in what you no longer do. You no longer drain energy on repeated inner battles. You no longer negotiate excessively with yourself over basic commitments. You no longer allow days out of rhythm to pull you too far away, and it is precisely the reduction of these struggles that creates a precious space for long-term thinking, for listening to inner signals, for asking deeper questions about direction and meaning. When you live long enough in this state, others begin to sense the difference, not because you speak more, but because you are present differently. There is a steadiness in your eyes, in your words, in your responses, and this steadiness creates trust, not blind trust, but trust built on consistency. Many opportunities in life do not come from being instantly better. They come from others, trusting that you will do what you say and say what you do. And that trust is built only over time through small choices held steadily. Another important shift at this stage is how you relate to the future. Before, the future may have been a source of anxiety because you were unsure how long you would last, unsure whether you would quit midway. But when you have lived long enough inside a durable system, the future becomes less frightening, not because all risks disappear, but because you trust how you will respond to risk. You do not need to know exactly how everything will unfold. You only need to know that you will continue to uphold the standards that created who you are now, and that trust brings a deep, calm. You begin to see life as a long-term construction process rather than a series of emotional tests. You understand that clarity does not arrive every day, but if you hold the way of living you have chosen, clarity follows action, not the other way around. And here you realize a crucial truth. Identity is not something you discover. It is something you train, day by day, through small choices. And when that identity becomes solid, many questions that once confused you begin to organize themselves. You know what to say yes to, what to say no to, where to invest time and energy, not because you have answers to everything, but because you have an inner compass reliable enough to guide you. From this point, life is no longer a sequence of passive reactions. It becomes an intentional journey where you step into the role of builder rather than being carried along. And this shift prepares the ground for the final part of the story, where everything that has been said is no longer only to be understood, but to be chosen, right here, right now, with the full presence and responsibility of someone who is ready to live differently. Closes this journey not with a gentle conclusion, but with a direct call for you to step into your own life right now. Because after everything you have moved through, there is one truth that cannot be avoided. No one else will live your life for you. No one else will hold your standards for you. And there is no perfect moment waiting ahead for you to begin living rightly. The only moment you truly have is this one, with imperfect conditions, with energy that may not be high, with fears that are still present. And it is precisely within these non-ideal circumstances that your choice carries real weight. You have seen that life does not change because of big promises. It changes because of small choices held steadily. You have seen that motivation does not come before action. It comes after. That identity is not something you wait to find, but something you build day by day. And that self-respect is not given. It is formed when you do not abandon yourself on hard days. What remains now is not to understand more, because you already understand enough. What remains is to choose how you will show up immediately after this story ends. You can return to old inertia, return to waiting, return to delaying through familiar reasons, and life will continue moving in the direction it has been moving, without needing your permission. Or you can choose differently, not through a dramatic decision, but through one small, very concrete, very ordinary action, yet real enough to send a new signal to yourself that from today you are no longer standing outside your own life. You do not need to change everything. You only need to choose one point to step into, one moment in the day where you will be fully present, one small standard you will hold, even when no one sees. One action small enough that you can repeat even when tired, because that repetition will open a new chain of reactions. And that chain will lead you into a different reality in a few years, not because of magic, but because you stopped subtly slipping and began moving with intention. Many people wait until they feel ready to live differently. But readiness does not come from feeling, it comes from the first action. And that action does not need to be large. It only needs to be real enough that you cannot deceive yourself. When you do the right thing even in a small way, you send a powerful message that you respect your own life. And that message will gradually change how you think, how you act, how you stand before the next choices. From here on, each day will continue to place familiar crossroads in front of you, ease or awareness, delay or presence, drifting or standing firm. And no one can choose for you. But if there is one truth you can carry with you after listening this far, it is this: you do not need to do something extraordinary to live with meaning. You only need to stop overlooking the small choices that are shaping your destiny each day. Stepping into your life is not an event. It is a way of living, and that way of living does not begin on some special future day. It begins right now, with the very concrete choice you will make after this story ends. A choice only you will know, and one you will never forget. You have reached the end of this journey, and if you are still here, that speaks a very clear truth, that a deep part within you is ready to live differently. What you have just heard is not a story meant to create temporary emotion. It is a map that shows why life does not change when you wait for enough motivation or perfect conditions, but changes when you learn to step into small choices each day. You have seen that being busy is not the same as making progress, that understanding does not create change if it is not translated into action, that subtle daily slipping is what quietly steals the future, and that real strength lives in the life system, the environment, the momentum, and the identity you train in silence. More importantly, you have seen that self-respect does not come from praise or big achievements. It is built when you do not abandon yourself on hard days, when you hold small standards even when no one is watching. Thank you for giving your time and attention to walk this journey to the end. If this content resonated with you, please press like to support the channel, share this video with those who may also feel stuck and need a different perspective, and do not forget to subscribe to continue walking alongside stories about personal growth, mindset, and inner strength. Because the journey of change does not need to be loud. It only needs you to return each day,